Hi everyone. Hi, my name is Oyinda. I'm a coach here with Leland. I work in private equity as an operating executive, and I have a background in consulting at Bain, and I graduated from Stanford GSB last year. I have worked with a ton of clients on Leland, and you can scan the QR code. It will take you right to my Leland profile. But I'm here today to answer any questions you guys have. So please feel free to put your questions in the chat. If you prefer to speak, raise your hand and then we'll invite you to share your question. But as you think about questions, here are some of the things I can help to answer, like crafting a compelling personal story for your MBA application, how you think about managing your timelines, trying to decide between schools and what you consider, how to get the most out of coaching and how I've worked with other clients, what to think about when you want to write an effective stories, some of the ways to leverage your non-traditional or international background, talking about what's ideal for a letter of recommendation or how to make your resume stronger. So here are just some ideas on topics that we can cover today, but feel free to write any application or business school related questions that you might have in the chat. And I'll share this also further down later in our session, but for everyone on the call today, you get a 10% off if after the call you book with me. The code will be available for the next couple days up until the end of the week. So you can also, again, scan this QR code that will take you straight to my profile to book an intro call with me, and we can take it from there. So that's all of the information I have to give you up front. I'll come back and share some of this again. But yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat and I'll just be looking in the chat to pull questions. I'll give it some time for everyone to type their question.
Hello, I have a question if you don't mind.
Oh, sure, Anna, go ahead.
Hi, how are you?
Good, thanks you.
I'm good as well. Thank you. I'd be on camera today, but I'm not in my usual location. But um, quick question about the letters of rec. So I attended the Leland Plus boot camp, and I've talked to some people who are doing MLT. So I've gotten different resources and insight on this. I know one of your letters of rec should be from your direct manager, but in college, I worked directly with my professor on a couple things, and he's seen my work ethic. I think he can vouch for who I am as a worker.
Mhm.
Um, but the feedback that I've gotten from a little bit all over the place is, try to stay away from getting a professor letter of rec. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's kind of the general guideline. It's, professors might be a little too removed from your professional experience, but it also depends. I don't know if you're a 2+2 applicant, in which case a professor could be a recommender considering you're still in college. But if you're not, are you 1 year removed from school? And maybe the professor might have worked with you longer than even your direct boss, right? So those are some of the things to consider. It's like what is the circumstance, but ideally just kind of blanket general statement would be don't go with your professor. You probably want to go with someone that you've actually had professional experience with, and that's something we can also explore further. But I think, yeah, generally it's like avoid that. Does
Thank
that
you.
answer? Yeah. Okay, I have one question here that says, what was your experience like at Stanford and why did you choose Stanford? I'll also just generalize this first before answering this by saying the reasons why people choose schools are very different and peculiar to them and their experiences and what they want to get out of it. But just on my experience broadly, I really enjoyed my time at Stanford. One of the things I was excited about Stanford for was their focus on personal development. And I was able to tap into all of the resources that they had in terms of classes and like actual practical coaching sessions that they had for second year students. So that was big for me and I got that. And then the Stanford community was also really great. It's about 450 students. So it's relatively small for business school. And so it creates a close-knit environment. But then because I like that doesn't mean someone else liked it. So as I share that, I just want you to also just be aware that, you have to consider this in relation to what your experiences are and what you would like. Which, while I'm waiting for the other questions, is also probably an important point to note that as you think about like applying to business school, you should try to get to know the schools because it does really help with putting your application together. Any
Yeah,
other questions?
yeah. I have a question. This is FOA.
Yeah.
When crafting the letter, sorry, the essay that says why Stanford,
Mhm.
I guess what are some key components you focused in on your essays that can help you stand out for Stanford specifically?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing I'll say is like really truly being authentic about why you want to go to Stanford. And in order for you to answer that, you have to have done your research, understanding the school and like all of the things they offer, and also truly understand why you want the degree from business school, right? But that being said, as you think about crafting your essay, um, more generally, people have answered that essay from very different angles. It might be a personal connection, they know someone who went there and how it was transformative to their life, or it might be a particular resource that the school offers. There's lead labs, there's the labs that help you with like starting your startup and like accelerating that. It might also be a specific class. A lot of people talk about like touchy-feely, the interpersonal dynamics class. There, well, I won't say a million and one, but there's several reasons why anyone would be excited about Stanford. So my suggestion, if you've done your research online to understand what the school's offering, you could also speak to past students and current students to understand that. And also working with a coach can help you refine that as well, in that the coaches have experience across different schools, and so they're able to understand what you want to get out of the MBA program and help you tailor that essay adequately with what they know about those schools. Hopefully that answered your question. Okay, I'm gonna take another question from the chat. Hey, regarding years of work experience, is 2.5 years enough by the time I apply? I'll say generally, yes, 2.5 years is enough, but it really, really depends on 2.5 years of what experience or even the school. There's some schools that they'll take MBA candidates right out of undergrad, and then there's some schools where you have to have at least 2 years of work experience. But yes, 2.5 generally. I'm not sure that there's any school that wouldn't take 2.5 years of experience, but it really depends on what you were doing in those 2.5 years and how you're able to communicate the things you've learned in those 2.5 years. Another question in the chat says, could you mention a few more specifics on the resources you leverage regarding personal development? Are there any other unique resources at the GSB you believe to stand out? Okay, so based off of my experience, I'll say specifically the ones I leverage for personal development was specific classes. So there's a class called Leading Paths to Power, which is a very practical class on, what it takes to be a leader. And then there's also Acting with Power, which is it's kind of like improv, but it's improv in the professional context. And then I took classes like interpersonal dynamics, which also has a kind of experimental component to it where we get to sit down in a group setting for 7 hours and give each other feedback. I was also a leadership lab coach, which allowed me to a leadership lab fellow, which allowed me to coach first years on how they develop themselves as leaders. And then other leadership positions within the business school experience also helped with that personal development. So those were some of the resources I leveraged. And there are several other resources. I probably don't even know all of the resources that are available to students, but I would suggest that you again reach out to more current students and past students and what is unique to you might not be unique to someone else. Like someone else probably already knows it, but it might be transformational for you relative to someone else. Okay, so there was another question that said, did you leverage MBA to pivot into private equity? If so, what resources did you find helpful for that shift? If not, what was your goal in applying to an MBA when you did? Okay, so I'll start with the final question, which was, what was my goal in applying to an MBA? Again, I'm sharing all of my answers for myself, but also just recognize that like everyone's experience is different. But I did the MBA one to pivot careers. So I used to work in fintech as a chief of staff, and now I work in private equity. And I also wanted to pivot geographically. I used to live in Nigeria, and now I live in the US. And yes, I was able to leverage my MBA to make that pivot into private equity. One, I was able to learn while doing my MBA all of the ins and outs of private equity, whether or not I liked it, what I liked about it, what part of private equity. So to be specific, I'm not an investor, I'm an operator. I liked operating, so I learned about the operating side of private equity, which I wasn't aware of before business school. And so that was one big way that the MBA helped me pivot. The second way was that I actually did get my job through a recruiter that came on campus. And so I sometimes I think if I didn't do the MBA, maybe I wouldn't have thought to go apply to that company. And so it was kind of a perfect opportunity for me to go into this industry that I otherwise may not have, gone out to seek for myself. So those were kind of the two big ways I made that pivot into private equity using my MBA. Okay. Hello, I'm about to start studying for the GMAT. If you took it, can you talk about the resources you used and any must-know tips? Um, Again, there's so many GMAT resources, so I'll share the ones like personally. I used the official GMAT guide, and I also watched a ton of videos on Magoosh, which some of you might be familiar with. And then finally, I don't remember the name of the last platform, but I think it might have been Empower GMAT. I watched videos on Empower GMAT too. And I think the tip I tend to give people is give yourself time. Studying for a test while working often requires more time than you think. And there are also coaches on Leland that actually coach for testing. So that's something you might want to consider depending on how you like to study. And then the other thing is a lot of people really focus on the quantitative and the qualitative learning, 2 + 2 = 3, or 2 + 2 = 5 or 4 or whatever it is. But sometimes like there's the strategy that a lot of people overlook. You have to know how to time yourself. You have to know when to skip questions. You have to know when, oh, I don't really know this one. I think I have to guess, but how do I strategically guess on this question? Those are all like strategic things that help you move the needle on your score on top of learning all of the like foundational quantitative things that go into the test. So I'll say don't overlook that. Definitely spend some time on the strategic side of thinking about a test and taking a test as well. A question says, how much of your class managed to land roles post the MBA? I've heard of stats where only 60% of LBS grads have managed to land roles. Unfortunately, I don't actually have that information off the top of my head. I think definitely a majority of the class landed roles, and Stanford is somewhat biased to entrepreneurial experiences as well. So quite a number of people also did start their own businesses or go down the search fund route. So I don't have the exact numbers, but I do know that the schools publish reports on employment, so you can definitely find it on their website. How did you approach your GSB and HBS essays? Did you focus on traits that the schools look for, maybe entrepreneurship versus leadership? Okay, this is a great question because as a coach, I get this question a lot. And I think, again, sound like a broken record, work with a coach because a coach would help you like refine this and like clear any doubts or questions you might have around this. So when I started my application journey, I really did think I was going to like, oh, this is what the school likes, and I'm going to like tailor my experiences to match what the school likes. And when I did it the first time, I wrote my essay and I chose not to submit my essay because I just didn't feel comfortable. I didn't like it. It didn't resonate with me. I thought I was pushing a narrative that wasn't true. And so I spent the year working on crafting my story, trying to write an essay that effectively communicated who I was, the experiences I had and felt very authentic to me. And I did use a coach in that time, and the coach was able to like ask me very introspective questions to force me to think about how I'm connecting the dots of where I was to where I am to where I want to go. And so I was able to do that and put forward an authentic story, just reflecting on my actual experiences without trying to bias it with what I think the school wants, because we actually don't know what the school wants. The school wants a variety of things, and your experience might just be that one thing that they need in the class. So my general rule of thumb here is be authentic to yourself. Think about what you truly want, what you've truly experienced, how that could be valuable to the class, and then share that and communicate that effectively with the outcome. Because once a story resonates with them, it doesn't matter whether the story is entrepreneurial or not entrepreneurial. You have all types of people in the business school classroom. And also just to remind you, I'm giving a 10% off for anyone that signs up to coach with me. And again, that's something we can work on. So I'll leave this up on the page for now for anyone that wants to scan it or take down the code and then reach out to me and we can work on that together. What made you consider applying to HBS, GSB, and Wharton, and why did you choose GSB being a triple admit? Okay, so this goes back to my earlier points about understanding what you want to get out of business school and understanding what the experiences at the different schools are. For me, I was very clear that like I wanted to be entrepreneurial. I wanted to expand my network. I wanted something that would push me out of my comfort zone. Those were some of the things that I was thinking about when I went into business school. And I also just resonated really well with HBS, GSB, and Wharton. Like I interacted with students from those schools, and I was pretty sure that like if I didn't go to any of these schools, like I didn't feel as strongly or connected to all the other schools. So I just prioritized applying to these schools because those were the places that I felt strongly connected to. The only other school I applied to was MIT, and I also got into MIT because entrepreneurial, and I already said that earlier, right? So why did I choose GSB? Is because the biggest thing, my biggest priority again was personal development. And while all the schools offer that, it just felt like GSB had an outsized amount of resources for that relative to the other schools. And so that was kind of the decision I made. And it kind of ticked all of my priority boxes. It was more entrepreneurial. It had a personal development side to it. And then finally, I hadn't lived on the West Coast before. And so it felt a little bit outside of my comfort zone to then move all the way to the West Coast. I'll take it. Sorry if I
Yeah,
pronounced
FOA.
it.
Yeah, that's my name. Yes, sorry.
I'll take it after. I'll take your question after
Awesome.
this question in the chat. Hi, I'm currently a senior in college looking to apply to the deferred MBA at GSB. If you've met or interacted with classmates who entered through the deferred route, was there something you noticed about them or their personalities that you think made them stand out? That's an interesting question, right? Like, I could tell you what stood out to me, but I don't know if that's what got them in. But I can also just tell you generally, like some of the things that are probably really good traits for 2+2 or deferred admits. So I'll say like intellectual curiosity is something that I probably saw with my classmates. So for example, like a lot of them were very engaged and active during their college experience. They were also, I mean, smart, like, get good grades, because how else do you like show that like you have the academic prowess to handle the MBA class? And then they had some experience, right? Like they had interned during their college career and also had prospects post college, so they kind of knew what they were doing, and so the MBA made sense in tandem with what they had done and what they were going to do after college. I think those were the only things that I can recall right now. And in terms of like what made them stand out, I don't know what made them stand out. I didn't read their applications, but I'm pretty sure like they probably just told a very compelling story. And I think that's a very key part of the MBA application. Yes, the GMAT is important, your resume, your recommendation is important. But if you do all that and you can't even communicate your story, the lessons and the experiences you have, then like to what end, right? So I think that's something that I'll probably call out. Okay, FYI, I'll take your question. I think you're on mute.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, so I have two questions that relate to funding. First one is what funding opportunities are available for you as an international candidate? Are there any opportunities for international applicants that originally came from Nigeria, for example? And what funding opportunities did you leverage within Stanford to pay for school?
I think every school differs, like different schools offer different scholarship and like loan packages. I'll say that some schools, I think something to note is some schools are merit-based and some schools are need-based. So that's again something to consider. So for example, Wharton is merit-based, and they offer it to you at the time of admission based off of whether, compared to all the other candidates, they think you deserve this scholarship. Harvard and Stanford are need-based scholarships. So you actually have to apply for a scholarship and tell them kind of like your financial history, and they determine based off of that if you need the support or not. And so for me, that was something that I leveraged with GSB, the need-based scholarship, but also the GSB has a scholarship, for example, called Bold Fellowship. It's a diversity-based scholarship, and diversity across different spectrums, diversity across gender, race, background, ability, like all sorts of diversity. And again, being able to tell a compelling story about how your diversity has made you bolder, quote unquote, or stronger is, part of what or how you get that scholarship. So those were the ones I know or I leverage and know about, but then the different schools have different offerings and would urge you to look into the schools and understand that. And again, I think there are coaches as well that can also help you think through like funding strategies. There's a question in the chat that says, how do you recommend leveraging any connections we might have at a school? They wouldn't be my recommender, but they offered to help. I think that's an interesting question. I don't think that and I'm not AdCom, so I don't know for a fact, but I'm pretty sure that they don't solicit input from outside. Like, imagine if every professor just had someone to recommend, it just wouldn't be a fair process, I don't think. So I don't think they can provide inputs into your admissions. But, when I said earlier about learning about the school, being able to connect your experiences and your, goals to the school, that's where someone who's very familiar with the school can help as well. Just share some of the information that they have about the school or the resources they have about the school. And then if it's someone that you've worked with, for example, right? Like, I think if you're on the waiting list for certain schools, they can take in an additional letter of recommendation. So if it's someone that you've worked with that knows about your work ethic and they also have a relationship with the school, then it's good to leverage that, right? But it also has to be done tactfully. And when I said I work with people on letters of recommendation, that's part of the things that I'll offer is like strategies around leveraging your recommendation letter, right? Like, how do you think about who to use, what you want them to say? And then if you're on the wait list, there's also kind of a wait list strategy that you can employ a coach to help you with. That's the last question I have on the chat. So if you have any other questions, please put them in the chat. I think we have about 3 more minutes. So if you have questions, don't hold them back. Make sure you're asking them or raising your hand and asking it on mute. While I'm waiting for questions, Again, you can scan the QR code. It will take you to my profile. You can schedule a free intro call. And then if you decide that you want to continue having coaching sessions with me, there's a code, a 10% off code that you can use throughout this week. Okay, I have a question that says, did you have different letter of recommendations for different schools? Personally, I did not, but I've seen people do that successfully. In the cases where I've seen people do that, it's probably because they're applying to many schools, and having the same people write for all of those schools can be quite a bit of work. So some of them have decided to like split it and have multiple people take on the workload. But I was only applying to 4 schools. So my recommenders thought it was fine to be able to write for all 4 of them. So any other questions?
My last question is, when you talked about Stanford having a prof professional development program, or I guess focus, what was some resources you used to actually leverage on Stanford's GSB's professional development program?
Okay, so I wouldn't say they have a professional development program. I would say that they have a lot of resources that enable personal development. And, some of the things I had shared earlier were their classes, right? Interpersonal dynamics, path to power, acting with power, or like the fellowship program, the Arbuckle Leadership Fellow program, where you're able to coach other people, or just taking on leadership roles within clubs in the business school, and like being able to hone in on that leadership in that period as a leader. So I'll say just in summary, those were kind of the ones that I leveraged, and some of the more popular ones as well. Okay, we're coming down to our last minute, so just if there are any other last minute questions. Otherwise, again, you can scan the QR code, you can find me, reach me, schedule a free intro call, and I'll be happy to help there. I got a very last minute question that says, is 325 GRE score good enough to make one a strong candidate? Unfortunately, I'm not able to say whether or not that's good or bad, because there's so many things that play into that. It's like, what was your undergrad GPA? What is the composition of the 325 based off of your like strengths or perceived weaknesses? There's so many things that come into play here. So I honestly can't tell you if it's a good or bad score, but if you, again, sound like a broken record, but if you work with a coach, they can help you do like basically an analysis or a quick check on like, okay, here's what you're bringing to the table. Are there any weaknesses here? Is your 325 good enough for what you have in the rest of your application, or could something be improved here? That would be my own personal take on that. But okay, that'll be the last question for today. Thank you all for joining. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to scan the QR code, schedule an intro session with me, or just go straight to a coaching session and take 10% off. Good luck with your applications, and you can find many other coaches on the Leland platform as well. Thanks, everyone.